Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for joining us. With me, as usual, is the leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, Mr. David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Malika.
Great to have you. This week we focus on what APNU, that's the Partnership for National Unity, is calling social unrest in our country. And of course, social unrest means of all sectors, including health, education, and of course, what is supposed to be the security sector. First off, Mr. Granger, I'm just going to make a statement, and I know I'll get a response from you. Guyana is in crisis mode because APNU and the PPP can't come to compromise, especially in the National Assembly. This sets a bad example for citizens in general.
Well, like you're quite right, there is a crisis, and APNU has taken a position in the National Assembly that we are going to assert the independence of the National Assembly. We are going to maintain the authority of the National Assembly. We're going to make ministers accountable. The present crisis, if you want to call it that, in fact we're heading for a collision, is the refusal of the president of this country to abide by his constitution or to, actually perform his constitutional function of assenting to bills which have been passed by the National Assembly. And there are two bills outstanding, and at present there is a game that is being played with the four local government bills. That is, although they were passed since the 7th of August, today we're into the middle of September, and there's no indication that the president has either received the bills or that having received the bills, he's prepared to assent to them. So this constitutional collision is not a matter of compromise. There's nothing for us to compromise on. The National Assembly has spoken, and the president has to do what he has to do, that is assent to the bills.
Before we speak specifically to the constitutional or the proposed constitutional crisis, how can the president not signing the local government bills lead to a crisis in our nation?
Because in this particular instance, on the 12th of June last year, or there about the middle of June 2012, he actually announced that unless the government side supported a measure, he would not give his assent to it. I think that was very prejudicial to start with. But in this case, the government side was involved in the select committee that was assembled to examine the bills. And what we see in the National Assembly is a product of the decision of both the opposition and the government side. So there is no reason for him not to assent. And it is very disturbing that over a month has passed and the bills have not appeared on the president's table when the Constitution and the standing orders of the National Assembly call for the bills to be sent to him at the earliest possible opportunity, without delay. And there has to have been a delay because, for example, when the budget is passed, within a day or two, he signs because it means that the government will seize up. But now we have a month going on to 2 months and he hasn't signed. So I'm only asking for him to do what his the Constitution requires him to do. That is assent to the bills.
Aside from the local government issue in the National Assembly, what really is a constitutional crisis, and what, or I should say, how would it affect citizens?
Well, a constitutional crisis occurs when one party prevents the Constitution from functioning. And the Constitution is meant to provide a framework, a legal framework. It's the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is there to make government possible. And if the president does not assent to bills, it means that he's preventing the Constitution from functioning. No, there are provisions in the Constitution to allow the president not to assent to bills under certain conditions. But the point that I made in my letter to the clerk is that the clerk has an obligation to send the bills to the president without delay. And in my view, in my opinion, in the opinion of the Partnership for National Unity, a crisis has already been triggered because the clerk has not done what the Constitution calls on him to do. There's nothing about Mr. Durjan, there's nothing about the Ministry of Legal Affairs in the Constitution. There's only National Assembly and the President. And as far as we are concerned, the Constitution has not been fulfilled in that regard.
Before we deal with the other matters of causing a social unrest, meaning health, education, and crime, You've been accused, yourself and a Partnership for National Unity, you've been accused of somewhat putting pressure on the clerk of the National Assembly. Do you care to comment on those accusations?
Well, there is pressure, but it's legitimate pressure in the sense that after a reasonable period, I wrote the clerk asking him to fulfill his constitutional obligation. I didn't make any threats, I didn't give him any warning, I didn't promise any sanctions. All I said, you have an obligation. I quoted the law, I quoted the standing orders, I said, fulfill your obligation under the Constitution. I hadn't asked him to do something which he's not required to do under the law. So if you call that pressure, well, it's pressure, but he must be pressed to do what's right.
Do you see that situation putting somewhat of a strain on the relationship that the opposition, more so APNU, needs to have with the clerk of the National Assembly?
No, this thing's above board.
Okay.
I think that by writing the letter, I created an opportunity for him to call attention to a problem. The problem wasn't manufactured by the opposition, the problem was manufactured by him either. He seems to be doing what convention called on him to do, but I gave him an opportunity to obey the law, and that is to send the bills to the president without further delay. That's all he has to do. The speaker has written to the president, I wouldn't say in the same vein, but the speaker has written to the president calling on him to explain why the bills haven't been assented to. So there are two letters, one from the leader of the opposition to the clerk, and the other from the speaker to the president. There's nothing there going to the Minister of Legal Affairs, nothing going to the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. He's not mentioned in any of the letters, as far as I'm concerned. So let's see what will happen, and if the Constitution is not obeyed, there's going to be a crisis, there are going to be problems.
On to the other social issues now. In a recent statement by Partnership for National Unity, one of the things that APNU highlighted is the fact that we have so many, if you want to call them slums and shanty towns and these kind of communities coming up. It can be argued that Guyana is not the only country where this happens. So what I'm really asking is, how can that contribute actually to a social crisis or social unrest here?
Well, in the first instance, reference is made to the widespread poverty in this country. And I don't think there needs to be any argument that where there is such widespread poverty, there are going to be social problems. The reason is, well, of course, you say that every country has some poverty, but in Guyana, the poverty is too pervasive. And other countries, there is less inequality. Guyana is becoming a very unequal society. And it is because of that inequality, it's because of the pervasiveness of poverty, because of the perception that some communities are being starved of resources. For example, you go into places, you see youngsters playing cards or dice or something, when, the state might be able to provide a proper football field. Even in the hinterland, this is something I've called for. Every region in the hinterland should have something akin to a sports stadium. I've seen the Akawayo people in the Upper Mazaruni, every year they have games, but they go from village to village and they create their own space, their own arena, if you want to call it that. Every village has its own pavilion. So all I'm saying is that the government must provide more amenities to the poor communities, must provide more opportunities for employment, must provide better schools so that they're better educated, and this will move people out of poverty. I don't want people to remain in poverty. And once you have lots of young people without leisure, without employment, without schools, you're going to have social problems, and that is what I'm trying to avoid.
Right. Health. How is poverty and those kind of situations connected to what some might say is a failing health system here?
Well, there are two levels. One level is the institutional level. We see that up to now, young mothers-to-be going to hospital, and either the baby ends up dead or the mother ends up dead. I think the rate of mortality at childbirth is still unacceptably high. So we need to ensure that at the institutional level, there is a more efficient delivery of health care. And secondly, at the local level, we would like to see that essentials such as drinking water, clean, pure drinking water, are supplied to the households. Now, if we have a case as we had in the Barima-Waini region, there are three sub-regions, if you want to call it that, at the Matakai, Matthews Ridge, Arakaka, Port Kaichuma. There's the Maruku area, and there's the Mabaroma, the settlement up there. What we have repeatedly, if you go back into the records, the medical records, repeatedly, children have died between December and March as a result of gastroenteritis. Now, children are, because of the physical makeup, are the most vulnerable. So what we're saying is that if you know this happens every rainy season, December rainy season, maybe because of the filth coming down to rivers, maybe because of turbidity in the water, whatever it is, the problem can be solved and children's lives could be saved. Now, what we see happening in other riverine areas, perhaps those affected by mining, I'm not sure what is the cause at the place called Masakaneri in the Rupununi, which is essentially a YY community. What we see happening is that a child has died. Maybe it's one child, but we should not lose one death because of a preventable disease. And we have to look throughout the country to ensure that our environments are safe and clean. There is no possibility of contamination or pollution, and that children, particularly children's lives, are protected from this type of disease. People don't really ought not to die from gastroenteritis in this day and age. We know the cause, we know the cure, and we know that if we keep our environment untidy and unsafe, there is going to be disease. So I'm calling on the government to take preventive action so that we don't have recurrence.
As far as you know and in your experience, I mean, this probably would take some sort of survey, but do you believe that social unrest in Guyana would be greater in the hinterland communities or on the coast?
Well, right now, social unrest is quite pervasive. For example, you had people coming out to protest on the Kokwani-Aichuni Road. In the recent past, you had parents at St. Ignatius protesting. In fact, only this week, I think, a student stabbed another student, and that has been the subject of protest. In the Mazaruni Basin, we had indigenous people traveling out to Georgetown early in August. In fact, they traveled out on World Indigenous Peoples Day. To make a protest. They were assembled outside the National Assembly, and they made a protest, and I think even during American Heritage Month they protested. We've had parents at the Port Kaichuma School. We have had parents at St. Agnes School, at La Parfaite Amani, on the West Bank, Demerara. So there are different causes, different reasons. We had, at one case, residents of the East Bank Babis coming to town to protest against the road. We had farmers from Essequibo Coast protesting against non-payment for supplying paddy and that type of thing. Protest is normal, it's natural, but after a while you see the tempo is increasing. You see, I do believe that the time will come, if these problems are not resolved, that there is going to be an explosion. There are just too many protests, there are too many young people, there are just too many criticisms. For example, let's look at something like schools. You know schools will open the first week of September. You know that you've got about 2 months holiday. Supply the furniture, repair the school, so when the students go, you don't have this annual shambles, this annual chaos.
I'm happy that you mentioned schools, because that leads to my next question basically. We see these protests, and whether it be parents or students, we see them only, most of them, in happening in September. Is there a system that can possibly be put in place to ensure that these things are not only highlighted or identified in September? What about throughout the school year, meaning maintenance?
Well, this is perhaps the most critical time because a new wave of students will come up from the primary level, particularly into the secondary level. And sometimes a new wave would come up from the nursery level to go into the primary level. So this is a critical time because new entrants demand new resources. And what I'm saying is that the Ministry of Education has enough time to prepare. I have been to a certain school, a certain secondary school in the East Coast, the day before, the night before schools were due to resume, and the parents showed me the empty rooms and said there's no furniture. And they told me there's going to be a problem. And I picked up the paper on the Tuesday because it couldn't, the incident occurred on the Monday. And there it was, the parents had to pick it. But within 72 hours, the furniture was there. All I'm saying, why couldn't the furniture be there 72 hours before? Why did they have to wait for a protest, for children to come, to be disappointed, and then they did what they ought to have done a week before? It's just maladministration.
The next major social issue that's affecting us is crime. But before I talk about crime, are you concerned that government or even government supporters may say that APNU, David Granger and the APNU are kind of nitpicking because Guyana is not in such a crisis state? After all, we can walk around, we can live, you know. Are you concerned?
Well, if my concern about security is nitpicking, I'll continue nitpicking nits till I die because it's an important nit to pick. The situation in security is that Clement Rohi has been Minister of Home Affairs for 7 years. For 7 years, he's failed to suppress the piracy. For 7 years, he's failed to suppress banditry. For 7 years, he's failed to suppress armed robbery. For 7 years, he failed to suppress cocaine trafficking. For 7 years, he's failed to suppress gun running. For 7 years, he's failed to suppress domestic violence. No, that's not nitpicking. I want a safe country. I want women and children to be safe. I want our young people to be able to avoid the dangers of narcotics abuse. You know, I want the gun crimes to stop. I want armed robberies to stop. And I will continue picking nits in this regard. But the point is that the government had always, at least over the last 14 or 15 years, the recommendations in order to, that could be applied to make Guyana safer. And they've never applied those recommendations fully. There's no National Drug Strategy Master Plan. There's no Security Sector Reform Action Plan. There's no decision, there's no intention on the part of the government to implement the recommendations of the Disciplined Forces Commission report. I was on that commission 10 years ago, and I know that the government has not been implementing the recommendations. So my attitude is an attitude that has been guided by my experience in the security sector and by my intention to do everything possible to make Guyana a safe place for our children to grow up. That's my intention, and I'll keep on picking up nets.
When we talk about crime and security, we're forced to discuss the Guyana Police Force. Now, sir, another concern, another thing I'm going to ask you if you're concerned about, Mr. Winston Felix. I know you can't speak for Mr. Felix, but he's currently the Shadow Minister of Home Affairs in a Partnership for National Unity. Do you have some concerns that government may have, and in some cases have already said that, look, while Mr. Felix was police commissioner, some of these things happened under his watch, and now he's with APNU criticizing the Guyana Police Force. Are you concerned?
I'm not concerned about that because over the last 20 years, this particular administration, the PPP Civic Administration, has been very intrusive. They have had a series of ministers who don't seem to understand that there's a division between what the political minister could do and what the professional commissioner is required to do under the Police Act. What we see happening is that the political minister has tried to usurp operational control from the professional commissioner. And this is what is causing the problem. Once you have a situation like that, right now, for example, you have in the Ministry of Home Affairs, the minister controls the community policing. This should be under the police. The minister controls intelligence. He's trying to put within the ministry significant operational arms and functions which belong in Evaluary, they belong in the police force. So that is what is causing the problem. So Mr. Felix, when he was commissioner, operated in a system that had already been battered, knocked, twisted out of shape by previous ministers of Home Affairs from the PPP. And you must bear in mind that one particular minister had to be brought before a presidential commission of inquiry to answer allegations that he was running a death squad. Where else in the Commonwealth, Caribbean have you ever heard about that? And eventually he was pushed out of office, and they made him High Commissioner to India or somewhere. I was really astonished that India accepted him. But the charges that were brought against him indicated that the environment under which the Commissioner of Police has to operate is not a friendly one. And there is evidence to suggest that this is what is happening at present, that Mr. Louis is not an easy man to work under. He gets involved in officers' leave and all sorts of things which are the purview of the Commissioner, within the purview of the Commissioner.
All right, I'm going to come back to Mr. Rohi in a few or so. But one of the issues that it's obvious in the Guyana Police Force is that they are the force is understaffed. How do you get young persons or even some experienced persons to join the Guyana Police Force?
Well, you're quite right. The force is understaffed, and this prevents it from performing its functions efficiently. Because you find that in some instances, one policeman might be doing the work of two persons, and there's the element of overwork. But in terms of attractiveness of the profession, again, I refer to the findings of the Discipline Forces Commission a decade ago, and we recommended that police salaries be improved and their working conditions be improved, so that young persons who come out of secondary school with the CSEC will be encouraged to pursue a long career, a fulfilling career in the police force. So they must have good pay, good prospects, a good work environment, and we can start attracting people to stay. Right now, in fact, at one time when I paid attention to these statistics, one policeman was leaving the force every day. At the end of the year, 365 policemen would have left, and that led to the hemorrhaging or the attrition of the police force. But the police force certainly has to be made more attractive. It is a good profession. It is very diverse. For example, you have a maritime element. You possibly can have an aviation element. You have a legal element. You have mounted police. You have traffic. You have forensic elements. People can become scientists and go into the police force. It could be a profession if it was portrayed as something more than a law enforcement body which is just concerned with arrest and prosecution. The country needs a good police force. It needs an efficient police force. But right now it's underfunded, it's understaffed, it's under-equipped, and we're not getting the best.
There are also complaints that the young persons who are taken into the Guyana Police Force are way underqualified, meaning one, sometimes two CXC subjects. Is there a way to control that, to change that?
Well, there may not be a way to control it in terms of the material which is available, but what could be done is maybe people are put on a remedial program, a remedial education program, so that the first year is spent in education to bring them up to the required level, and the second year is spent in policing. So it means that we set up police academies. We have to accept the reality. There's no point denying people entry, but we can look for the better qualified among them and give them a second chance at the CXC or the CSEC, and just make it a little longer. 1 year of academic and 1 year of policing before they graduate as constables. But that might not be the solution, but what I'm saying is we have a problem, let us solve the problem.
Okay, all right. Before I come back to the entire issue of social unrest and social crisis in Guyana, it has been 1 year and months since the opposition, more so APNU, would have called for the removal of Clement Rohi from the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, this has not been done. Does that deter you in any way? Are you discouraged?
No, I'm not discouraged because we intend to maintain our policy. We believe that eventually it will be successful. As I said a few minutes ago, in every sector of security, of public security. We have had failures during Mr. Rohi's 7-year tenure. And I feel that it is a complete waste of time. It's worse than a waste of time to keep him there. So we are looking to ensure that the government understands our policy. We have said that we are not going to approve any measures brought by him before the Parliament. If the AFC wants to bring a measure or support it, that's a matter for the AFC. But the APNU is very clear that Mr. Rohi's tenure has been a very unhappy one for Guyana, and we would like him to go from that particular position as Minister of Home Affairs. So I'm not being too personal. All I'm saying is that that is not the right portfolio for him. Perhaps his talents suit him for another appointment, but not that.
How far is a Partnership for National Unity willing to go to address the issue of social unrest in Guyana, especially crime? And I should more or less ask you, are you willing to become forceful? How much can you do to address social crisis and social unrest here?
I am a very forceful person, and the Partnership for National Unity has been very forceful. That is why a resolution will be brought against Clement Rohi. And that is why we've had measures about making the rivers safer. That is why we brought measures about trafficking in persons. We are very concerned about public security and human safety. And if you look at the record of a Partnership for National Unity, even this year, you will see that we are the party above all others. We are the party which is concerned about the human condition and about public security. So what can we do? We have to keep on keeping on. We will keep on putting pressure on the administration and on the ministry and on the other ministries that are concerned with human safety and security. For example, the Ministry of Public Works is concerned with safety on the rivers. The Ministry of Health is concerned with deaths of women and children in the hospitals. The Ministry of Legal Affairs is concerned with holding inquests, and we've asked all of them some important questions. You know, the Ministry of Education is concerned with the deaths of children at schools. Sometimes we've had stabbing, as I said. The child hasn't died, the one from St. Ignatius, but certainly we've had a murder before, we've had suicide. So we are the party that cares about people, and we'll continue to maintain pressure. So I'm not worried. I think people are gradually coming to realize that there's one party in the National Assembly which is going out there to battle for them, and that's a Partnership for National Unity.
And having said that, do you believe that you've gotten support, whether it be silently or publicly, from civil society?
It has been muted. Okay. I do feel confident that some organizations, for example, those concerned with trafficking in persons, realize that we are speaking for them. And they have not come out publicly and said, hey, we are for APNU, but they know that we give them voice and that we are concerned about the things they are concerned about. Okay,
all right. Thank you very much, sir. Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and Leader of the Opposition, Mr. David Granger. This has been another edition of The Public Interest. I am Malaika Ramsey. Thanks for watching.